Today, we will examine how misogynoir has impacted academic achievement, campus life, and housing practices at predominantly white colleges for Black women. Despite an increase in educational attainment among Black Americans rising from 11.9% in 2002 to 17.3% in 2022, the disparities in degree completion rates between Black students and their peers remain stark. According to the American Council of Education's 2024 status report, Black students, regardless of the type of institution they began their education at, were least likely to complete a degree or certificate compared to their counterparts from other racial and ethnic groups. This presentation aims to center the lived experience of the Black female college students, exploring how their intersectional identities shape their integration into student and campus life. Despite some progress, significant disparities persist, underscoring the necessity to consider race, gender, and societal attitudes in shaping future educational policies and practices. As of 2024, according to the Women's College Coalition, 31 women's colleges are still operational in the United States. The early prestigious institutions, known as the Seven Sisters, according to Ringberg, were instrumental in challenging the prevalent gender norms of their time. However, one must ask, how does an era where societal attitudes and gender norms for white women were positively changing fit into a nation actively disenfranchising Black women from collegiate scholarship? On the one hand, Thielen paints the story of the Seven Sisters as the most conspicuous and successful feature of American higher education between 1880 and 1920. However, this narrative is complicated by the experiences of Black women in these institutions. For instance, Linda Perkins notes that Smith College did not graduate two Black women in the same class until 1925, illustrating a broader reluctance to admit and welcome students of color. Even more starkly, Vassar College, as the last of the seven women's colleges to quote unquote knowingly admit Black women, represents the political of these exclusionary practices we'll get in today. Out of the 31 women's colleges, 29 are predominantly white institutions, with only two classified as historically Black colleges, according to the Women's College Coalition. As many white women sought equality in education and other aspects of American life, they in turn often denied that same right to African American women. The establishment of historically Black colleges for women, such as Benedict College in North Carolina and Spelman College in Georgia, responded to these barriers, aiming to provide educational opportunities tailored to the needs of Black women. Contrary to popular belief, the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education indicates that Black women comprise a significant portion of enrolled students at many women's colleges in the early 2000s. The highest percentage of Black women enrolled in women's colleges and universities is noteworthy because many of these institutions are aligned with the Catholic Church, an institution with a low percentage of African American members. This vital role of historically Black colleges for women underscores a critical observation made by Audre Lorde in 1984, where she pointed out a pervasive issue within the women's movement that, by and large, white women focus upon their oppression as women and ignore differences of race, sexual preference, class, and age. Even though the proportion of female students in higher education has surpassed that of male students for the past 50 years, according to Kim et al., many women still face underrepresentation, including those from low income backgrounds, women of color, and non traditional students, as reported by Catherine Ike. Audre Lorde in Sexism and American Disease in Blackface emphasizes the necessity of an intersectional approach to Black women, recognizing that we have a particular and legitimate issue that affect our everyday lives. Misogynoir, a term coined by Moya Bailey in 2018, defines the interplay of racism and sexism and sheds light on the unique challenges faced by Black women in various settings, including colleges and universities. Research has shown that Black women in academia are particularly vulnerable to misogynoir, with reports indicating incidents of bias, discrimination, and even far-right ideology impacting their experiences, according to Bailey. And Ahuna et al. In 2023 introduced the concept of far-right misogynoir, analyzing Black college women's experiences with white male supremacist influence, thus extending the discourse of race, gender, and higher education. Dr. Luna Perkins' research emphasizes that exploring the experiences of African American women in these colleges will provide insight to the extent in which these institutions mirror the views of the larger society concerning racial issues. The image of the Black scholar in many ways was reserved for Black men within the talented 10th, a term coined by Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois in The Negro Problem to identify the top 10% of African Americans who would lead the race out of inequality through higher education and leadership, according to Du Bois, Nelson, and Thielen. While the archetype of the Black scholar within the talented 10th was predominantly envisioned as a male, the narrative overlooks the substantial and transformative role of Black female college students. Because of the perception of anti intellectualism and perceptions of quote unquote acting white, among young Black men, Black women have sought refuge in women's colleges, as found by Allen. In essence, while the talented 10th is often remembered for its male figures, the contributions of Black women within this intellectual elite were equally vital. By the start of the 20th century, there was a noticeable increase in Black women graduates from institutions like Radcliffe, signifying a slow but essential change in admission processes. The success of Black women in academia during this period not only contested the stereotypes of intellectual incapacity, but also exposed the faulty reasoning behind racially discriminatory admission practices, according to Perkins. This form of resistance to racial prejudice is further underscored by Du Bois' critique of the admission processes at significant institutions, including many prestigious women's colleges, which, while not outright rejecting Black students, strongly discouraged them from applying. The case of M. Carey Thomas, who served as president of Weimar College from 1893 to 1922, is a stark example of such practices. Thomas's policies effectively barred Black women from the college, justifying this exclusion under the pretense of maintaining academic standards, thus mirroring the broader societal beliefs in the patriarchy and racial hierarchy. In 2017, the Weimar community grappled with the college's legacy of racism and M. Carey Thomas's reputation of anti-Black and anti-Semitic practices. In a speech to the first year class of 1916, Thomas said, "If the present intellectual supremacy of white race is to be maintained, as I hope it will be for centuries to come, I believe that it will be because they are the only races that have seriously begun to educate their women." In the Weimar Alum Bulletin, as a part of this reconciliation, they placed a temporary moratorium on the usage of Thomas's name on buildings and student spaces, to which Neela Khan, president of the Club of Rhode Island, says, "Bravo, Bryn Mawr, well done." Thielen provides a poignant insight into the historical context of admission practices, highlighting the significant role that skin complexion played in the admission process. This racial ambiguity inadvertently resulted in greater access to education for those who could pass as white compared to their darker skin counterparts. According to the Vassar Alum Quarterly, in 1893, when Anita Florence Hemmings applied to Vassar, there was nothing in her record to suggest that she would be any different from the 103 other girls entering her class. However, by August of 1897, the world and the college had discovered her secret. Hemmings was the first Black graduate from Vassar more than 40 years before the college opened its doors to African Americans. If Hemmings had indicated her race as colored on her application, she would have almost certainly been denied admissions to the college. Allen's findings suggest that institutional climate and culture play a significant role in the shaping the career trajectories of Black women. Specifically, Black women were more likely to pursue non-traditional occupations when they attended private colleges, where they frequently interacted with staff, faculty, and a student culture that emphasized intellectual values. Perkins highlights Oberlin's unique position as an institution founded by abolitionists, admitting African Americans and women as early as 1833. This early commitment to inclusivity set Oberlin apart from other institutions and contributed to educating over 100 African American women up until 1910. In contrast, the combined graduation rate of African American women from the seven sister colleges during the 1890s through the 1960s was approximately 500, according to Perkins. This comparison between Oberlin and the Seven Sisters colleges illustrates the varied pace at which different institutions embrace diversity and inclusion. The literature on admissions and achievement of Black women in elite colleges reveals a multifaceted narrative characterization by challenges related to racial ambiguity, colorism, and institutional responses to diversity. The analysis of primary sources, notably the works of Perkins, provide a nuanced understanding of how these practices were manifest and challenged over time. Perkins highlights that while Wesley housing was segregated in 1913, it was the only institution among the Seven Sisters that permitted Black students to live on campus. This action underscored the administrative support for Black female colleges when issues arose, represented a significant departure from the norm of outright exclusion or severe restriction practices elsewhere. However, the broader landscape could have been more encouraging. Perkins details how by the late 1890s, the majority of African Americans who reside in the South were so subjugated to the comprehensive barriers of segregation, a situation that was exacerbated by the Plessy v. Ferguson Supreme Court decision of 1896. This legal backdrop of separate but equal did nothing to mitigate the discrimination faced by African American students seeking higher education in the North, where colleges were often reflecting the prevailing societal segregation. At Smith College, the case of Carrie Lee vividly illustrates the institutional challenges and personal humiliation Black students face. Unaware of Lee's race upon her arrival, the college initially relegated her to servant quarters, a decision that was only overturned after significant advocacy by the NAACP, facilitating Lee's access to equitable housing and, by extension, a more inclusive college experience, according to Perkins. This incident at Smith prompted a broader assessment of housing policies among the Seven Sisters, revealing Wesley's unique stance on non-discrimination admissions and policies. Conversely, institutions like Mont Holyoke, Brainerd, Bryn Mawr, and Vassar did not admit African American students in 1913, with Bryn Mawr and Vassar continuing to enforce segregated housing into the mid 20th century. This historical examination underscores the complexity of navigating institutional policies that often mirrored or reinforced societal segregation despite the transformative potential of higher education. The anomic experiences described by Allen in 1992 underscored the alienation and social disorientation that Black women face, leading Black women to a state of personal unrest, a breakdown of social connections, and a lack of sense of belonging within our institutions. The historical exclusion of Black women from academic opportunities dating back to the era of slavery and the colonial colleges sets the stage for understanding the complexity and the contemporary challenges they face. Women's colleges continue to advance social and economic opportunities by providing and achieving positive outcomes for women often underserved by higher education. IME's findings show that women colleges are able to enroll students with demographic profiles similar to public universities by enrolling those who have historically been less well served by higher education and achieve the completion rates like liberal arts colleges statistically higher than public university. Lord in 1984 asked of her audience, "What is the theory behind racism?" The failure of white feminism to recognize the significance of racial diversity has long been a divisive issue among American women, feminists, and academic institutes. Eck even writes, "Misogynoir is a modern day form of Black women's dehumanization." In a society shaped by capitalism, the politics of division, and patriarchy, women's colleges and universities often resisted integration, viewing it as a threat rather than a vital source of strength and empowerment. What is currently the role of gender in shaping educational policies and practices? Scholarly literature consistently speaks to Black women attending predominantly white colleges and women's colleges outside of Ben and Spelman to have a considerable cultural, psychosocial, and personal adjustment difficulties, according to Allen in 1992. Ike, in her 2020 report, summarizes the necessity for continued research because of her dissatisfaction and limitations with the dearth of information available for contemporary women's colleges experience based on outdated and anecdotal evidence. More must be uncovered. Many women's colleges have revised their mission to include services for transgender students, acceptance of men for specific programs, or collaborations and mergers with other local men co-institutional institutions, according to Ike. As the number of American women colleges and universities have declined, so has the research. With this in mind, it is vital to examine the modern perspective that highlights and challenges the trends still facing Black female college students' experiences that acknowledge their race and gender dynamics. In the exploration of race and gender in higher education, a critical issue is the effect of racial battle fatigue on Black college women. This concept develops deeply into the psychological strain brought about by the need for these women to navigate through a landscape marked by stereotypes such as the angry Black woman. Researchers like Corbin Smith and Garcia in 2018 have highlighted how Black female students employ coping mechanisms to deal with social stereotyping and racial microaggressions in these social settings and educational settings. They find themselves consistently defending against racism and sexism, intensified by the prevalent media stereotypes and the pressures of representing their race positively. As discussed by Spencer et al. In 2022, this approach, while aimed at navigating microaggressions and combating stereotypes, adversely affects their psychological well being and health. The phenomenon of code switching or altering behavior and speech to fit into the predominantly white culture of their educational institution emerges as a significant strategy for Black women in these environments. The stereotype of the angry Black woman is characterized by descriptions of Black women as irrationally aggressive, overtly assertive, and argumentative. The stereotype, as detailed by Corbin et al., represents a miscategorization that not only unjustly ascribes masculinity to behaviors deemed assertive or aggressive, but also misaligns Black women as inherently irrational. Such a caricature complicates the archetype of Black women, intertwining racial and gender politics in a way that both challenges and confirms traditional norms of masculinity and femininity. Recent scholarship, including works by Crooks, has continued to highlight the repercussions of stereotypes on the mental health and academic experience of Black women. By perpetuating the angry Black woman stereotype, academic institutions may inadvertently foster environments where Black women's contributions are undervalued or misinterpreted. For instance, an assertive Black woman in classroom discussion might face unfair labeling as aggressive or confrontational, which can hinder her participation and negatively impact her learning experience. The stereotype does not only misrepresents Black women, but also contributes to a climate of misunderstanding, bias that can affect their academic and professional trajectories. The journey of Black women in academia during this era was one of resilience and redefinition. They were not passive in their pursuit of knowledge. Instead, they were architects of their own identity, carving out spaces for themselves in often unwelcoming environments. This historical and cultural backdrop can increase feelings of isolation and alienation among Black women in college as they navigate the spaces that have traditionally marginalized them. Considering the 31 operational women's colleges in the United States as of 2024 and their role in advancing gender equality and reshaping societal attitude towards women's education, it is vital for the continued education of Black female college students that institutions still need to address the unique challenges faced by Black women, such as racial battle fatigue and insufficient support or role models, which contribute to lower graduation rates among this demographic. By connecting historical experiences with contemporary challenges and raising awareness of misogynoir and its impact on Black female college students, we may foster a deeper understanding of the need for ongoing reform and the critical importance of addressing intersectionality of Blackness and womanhood in educational settings and work towards creating a more supportive and inclusive academic environment for all individuals. Thank you.